Hello, and thank you for watching this presentation by the American AIS Society. Please support the organization by becoming a member. Go to irises.org and click on Join. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. This is our, I think, 32nd webinar that we've presented from the American AIS Society. And you can find most all of those webinars on the AIS YouTube channel. Anyway, I would like to welcome you to this webinar. And before we start and introduce the speaker, I would like to say that we are going to go for a little over an hour, probably tonight. And then there will be a follow-up webinar in late fall or early next year, after this year's bloom season, and Alan sees all of his hybrids blooming this year. We'll have him back to do a follow-up and continuation of this program. So right now, I'd like to introduce our webinar for tonight. And this is all about Reticulata iris and creating amazing new colors and patterns by Alan McMurtrie. And Alan is a retired electrical engineer living in Toronto, Canada. Since retiring, he has been able to work full-time on his hobby as a hybridizer of bulbous irises, notably Iris reticulata hybrids. Alan's hybridizing efforts began in the 1980s with named hybrids in the late 1990s. In the 2000s, he was seeing a range of colors showing that orange is possible in reticulatas. His first tetraploid hybrids appeared in 2015. Alan has won numerous awards for his work, including from the Royal Horticultural Society and the Scottish Rock Garden Club. He has received the British Irish Society Sir Michael Foster Memorial Plaque in 2010 for advancements in the genus Iris. He's also won the British Irish Society Hybridizer Award in 2016, and he was awarded the American Irish Society Hybridizer Medal in 2019 for his groundbreaking work with Iris reticulata. So, welcome, Alan, and it's all yours.
Okay. You should be all seeing my screen at the moment. No, screen. Do you see me?
Yeah.
Good. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a cream reticulata, and it is, I gave it a name called Starlight. It's a second generation Sophiensis by Danfordi hybrid, the S by D down there, and it was bloomed for the first time in 1999. So just, there's little bits and pieces on some of these slides just to give you time perspective and so on. It would have then been, I guess, 3 years later that sea green bloomed, and kind of amazing to get a green color. And we'll be talking a lot more about these as we go on. Oops. Okay. So just in case people weren't aware, there is a handout that is being passed around to give you some background. Tonight, my plan here is to whet your appetite with the photos of what I've accomplished. So we're going to be talking about the Reticulata species, which are then the foundation to what I've been able to do. And it's important to try and understand some of that so that you know what will work and what won't. And then at a point, we hope to go down the rabbit hole to this whole new world and get more into a bit more understanding of these new hybrids and where we could be ending up going with that. And as I've indicated there, there's too much to talk about in this one presentation. I did a presentation on Monday to the King County Irish Society, and I went for 2 hours, and I still wasn't finished. I have trimmed back a bit, but there's just a lot of good information here. And what I do try and do is I do try to provide a bit of an educational program. So it's not just about showing pretty pictures. Pretty pictures are very nice, but one would like you to be able to learn something, pick up little bits and pieces up. You'll hear me talk about 2n equals 20 reticulatas. So these are the typical reticulatas that you'll find in the wild. And I say that specifically because if you go to your nursery, garden nursery, you may find various things like Alida and Pixie and Harmony, and those are hybrids between different reticulata species. And for breeding purposes, if you're dealing with the 2n equals 20, the normal typical reticulata, then you will be able to create new hybrids. There are 2n equals 16 reticulatas, and we'll be talking a bit about those. One of those that it's not on the slide there, but you may have heard of Catherine Hodgkin. That is a hybrid between Histrioides and Vinigodovi, but it is a sterile hybrid. So 2n equals 16, we have Histrioides vinigodovi and the Adiamanica. And where we would potentially go down the rabbit hole in the Alice in Wonderland new colors and patterns are the 2n equals 18. So they're involving Iris danfortii, Iris sophiensis, a reticulata that I collected from your chat. And there is also a reticulata known as Halkis, which one would hope that you would be able to find it in the United States. I did have a friend get me some 2 years ago, so in the fall of 2021. Unfortunately, so to speak, what bloomed was Iris reticulata, the Hort form. So I was a bit disappointed that I didn't have true Halkis. I do believe we got our money refunded, but that's where some comments are, you order or buy a particular variety and you end up with something else. The future, well, this is where we want to go, at least I want to go with creating tetraploids. And in a sense, if we think, we as iris people, think of standard dwarf bearded iris, they came about by crossing pumillas with tall bearded iris. So to speak, different chromosome counts, and you're essentially what we're trying to do. Well, I'm wanting to do this to be able to create a line of iris that have some genes from normal reticulatas and some genes from from my special hybrids, from the Alice in Wonderland type of hybrids. So this particular slide is just showing that the reticulata irises can come up through the snow. They're not bothered by the snow. They are from mountainous regions, generally speaking, in Turkey and Iran. Here's a case where obviously the reticulatas like us, we're fed up with winter, and the reticulatas are eagerly wanting to get into bloom. The two flowers there, though, that are opened, you'll see that they're covered in ice. So we can occasionally get some ice or even more snow later, like as these are up. If the flowers are fresh, they'll stand up. They may fall over a little bit, but then they'll, when the warm weather comes and the ice melts, they'll perk back up. But if they've been open for a couple of days and then they get an ice storm, they're going to get zonked a bit. But it's nice. This is one of the very nice things that sort of got me really interested in reticulatas was the idea that they're the first iris to bloom, along with like snowdrops and Galanthus. So I'm going to start off with giving you a bit of, we'll call it eye candy. So this is just showing you some pretty pictures, get you a little bit interested in the idea of what I've been able to develop. White caucasus is kind of amazing because it is, to a large degree, it is pure white. When I say that, I did mention the idea that in the wild, it is a purple reticulata. So something has happened to this. It has been found, apparently, if you were to go there, and I haven't been there, into Lake Sevan area of Armenia, you would on occasion be able to run across white reticulatas like this, where something has happened to the chemicals inside, and it's no longer producing whatever the chemical is that reflects the purple back to our eyes. So if you look very, very closely, you can see right in around the ridge, there is some actual white, which would normally be white on another reticulata. And then you can see a slightly grayish, like just off-white, just slightly off-white, but to all intents and purposes, white cacao is white. The distinction that I'm trying to make is that Natasha is actually William Van Eden's had selfed Cantab to make a lighter and lighter blue, and ended up with this pale, what is really a pale blue. So if we skip on here, we have eye catcher, and we'll see a bit more. So right now we're just into the giving you some eye candy to show you what I've accomplished and so on. Pristine is not yet been introduced. I hope that it will eventually be introduced. We've got a reasonable amount of it. I don't know whether it could be 10,000 bulbs, something like that. Orange Glow, there is a small quantity of it available in the trade. The prices are somewhat high, but there's some reasoning why we needed to get plant breeders' rights for it and then allowed it to be introduced. When it was first sold by Janus Ructions, it was selling in whatever it was there. I can't quite see because my thing's in the way. 2011, it was selling for 30 euros per bulb. And Smile was my very first light yellow. So when I went plant collecting in Turkey in 1985, specifically aimed at trying to find a diploid form of Iris danfortii, one of the things that I was hoping that I might be able to accomplish that I thought was a reasonable goal was to come up with a reticulata that was light yellow. And so in 2009, I did accomplish that goal. Wow is when that bloomed, all I could say is, wow, I'd never thought anything like that was possible. When I saw 05HW-1 and the brown markings on the fall, well, the answer to a question is, where did those brown markings come from? Well, the answer is, it's magic. Just kind of a little fun thing for the name there. And that is actually as a result of the chat reticulata that I collected in Turkey. Now, top left is another pale reticulata from danfortii, and it's interesting that this has standards, reasonable size standards, and we'll get into that later as well. There are two yellows, the middle and the top right. I did put those into the lab to be converted to tetraploid. I don't know which one will be the better one, so to speak, but ideally one of those could conceivably replace danfortii in the market. But that then is all dependent on the Dutch bulb growers and whatever, if we can work things out there. But just some interesting other ones. The 05BL4, we do have a tetraploid version of that. It's a little bit, the blue's a little bit darker, just something nice there. 08FW1 is really nothing special in a sense. It's really, you could say, a nothing, but the key point of it is the orange ground on the fall, and you can see how it is quite orange. It's just as orange as the ridge, and it lasted 2 days. And the reason I say that is because Orange Glow, which was my first orange, it has an orangish intensity to it, but then that dies out. It fades away, so to speak. So it's good to see that that was possible, and it was in 2015 that bloomed for the very first time. It's interesting to see the top center, top right, how they are so very similar, and yet the parentage is quite different. And if we get there, we'll show you some of the parentage between the two of those. On the bottom left, it's interesting, like, oh, well, that's just a blue. And we're not really, like, from a marketing point of view, you show that to somebody in the Dutch bulb business and they'll say, well, it's just a blue, and people can buy blues cheaply, like Harmony. So why, there's no real reason to have another one. But it's interesting in the sense of the orange on the fall. That was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. And this is where what you're really looking at from a hybridizer point of view, well, even just from a personal point of view, a person's own personal point of view, is you say, oh, I wonder what we could do with that. I wonder what we could mix that in with and come up with something new and different. This is where the 05 GT1, it is actually a bit on the small side, but it's interesting to see the brown markings, or whatever this exact color naming might be, and to see the coloring on the fall. I find that quite interesting and wonder where that would be able to take us. And because of that, I did put it into the lab to be converted to a tetraploid. These are some interesting things. The top left, it was different, so I quite like that. Whoops, we're going the wrong way there. Just happened to hit the buttons on the computer. I do like this 10CR1. Now, part of that is because I hadn't, at that point, 2016, hadn't necessarily seen a whole lot of different yellows, oranges, excuse me. Any of the oranges that I've seen, several of them were very similar to orange glow. There wasn't anything different, and this was different. And I did actually put that into the lab as well. The one over on the top left, top right, excuse me, 12CF1 isn't really that interesting. It really doesn't have a good flower shape, but it's more, I put it here just to show you how the standards and the style arms are quite a different color. So rather than a lot of these where the fall and the style arm or the standard has a similar coloring to the overall flower, it's nice to see some things being different, so to speak, broken apart. And then speaking of something like that, it's nice to see with this eye of the storm how there's so many different colors. Like I don't mind these multiple coloring to the reticulatas. It is a case where the Dutch will tend to say, oh, well, we want pure colors. So pure blue, a pure purple, a pure yellow. Are they going to get on me about a pure orange? And yes, okay, we can probably do a pure orange, but let's, variety is the spice of life, so to speak. Yeah. The 14AA1, just some interesting different coloring, and I was blown away by the 11JB1. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that. There hasn't been anything quite like that. It's the fall is almost a black color, just the very dark coloring and so on. I just get so amazed by how nice some of these colors are, or a lot of the colors are. As we were speaking about earlier, there's a lot of them that aren't that special, but all we need is just a couple each year. And as it is, even with a couple each year, I get told, Alan, you've got too many, too many nice ones. And it gets kind of disappointing to see the grower rejecting some of these things that I think are quite nice. But there is a reality as to how many we can reasonably get in the market. It does take 12 years to build up the stock of these things, and there aren't any growers that are willing to deal with small stocks. I would love it if there was a grower who would be able to grow small stocks, and then there are firms like Jacquemont who could sell the small stocks. And this even goes to some of the special forms of reticulatas that I might have been using in my breeding program. Anyway, I got some comments about that later if I remember to get to them. So a red iris, so to speak, as we know, there's no real red, but a nice brown, red brown here, 11G04. I like that a lot. I don't know whether the grower, it is in Holland right now. I don't know whether he'll like it enough to propagate it. 11GT1 is another pale light yellow. I do tend to like the 11GL question mark one. The question mark comes in from to do with the idea, was it really in the GL row, like in the GL planting or something else? The 11 means that it was the seed was planted in 2011, And it starts off with the first cross is AA, then it goes AB, AC, and so on. And in this case, we got up to GL. And it could have been when I went to replant that, the particular bulb was more like in the middle of the row, and the rows are only 3/4 or 1.5 inches apart. It's the only way that I can get such a large number of seeds between, say, typically 3,000 to 6,000. And when you consider how much space you have overall in your garden, and it takes 5 years to go from a seed to a flowering plant, you really want to try and pack them in, so to speak. And I'll also mention that roughly there's between 25 and about 32% germination, just from some earlier times when I had extra time, didn't have as many bulbs to work with. I was able to see that there was about 5 to 7% losses over a bunch of years, so roughly a net 25% germination. So when you do fill an area of seeds, there will be, once they start blooming, there will be some holes, but no problem. You need to dig up and give the particular variety more room, because you want to try and encourage it to increase. So you can, where there are ones that are particularly nice, to get them over to Holland to start building up the stock, in particular to let the grower see them and start to evaluate them. Because he probably wants to see them for a couple of bloom seasons to see what he thinks of them. The catch-22 with the one on the right, lower right, is that it's a very lovely white, but hey, we have eye catcher. We've got a lot. Keep getting a lot of nice whites. I mean, there's a lot of whites that aren't as nice, so no problem, we'll get rid of those. But there is another very nice one, the 12DK1.
Hey, Alan, got a couple questions if you're ready to take a couple questions. Well, first off, when you mention you take these to the lab, what are you doing with them in the lab, and what does that mean?
Oh, very simply, I'm spending a large sum of money to have the lab convert them to tetraploid.
Okay.
So they're using colchicine to create the tetraploids, with the aim that what I'm wanting to do is bring those genes up to be able to involve those with crosses at the tetraploid level.
Okay.
I mean, it's an excellent question, because that's where it becomes some interesting science. I'll just quickly throw out the idea that Catherine Hodgkin is a dead end, and it has to do with the genetics. Although both of the parents are 2n=16, they're different enough that, yes, you're able to create that one hybrid, or people copy that and create similar ones, but it's a sterile dead end. And if I had found that Iris danfordi and Sophiensis was another sterile dead end, all I'd end up with was just some blues. I wouldn't have gotten into all of this color variation. Doesn't mean that you're going to get that color variation if you went to the tetraploid level with just Histrioides and Vinigradovi, but you can't find out unless you go there, right?
Okay. I've got 3 or 4 questions from Anna Cad. What are the typical colors of species, and how many species are in the wild?
We're gonna get into that. So
okay.
I'm gonna have to just hold you off, because we really need to get going here. And there's a big. I mean, I'm just at the very beginning, and we've already roughly used up half an hour. But anyway.
So most of these you're gonna be covering. I'll just mention the other questions and let them know that you'll cover this. Is the orange color a mutation, and where did it come from?
Came from the chat reticulata, in part.
Is orange recessive or dominant?
Somewhat very recessive.
And how many average seeds per pod, and how long does it take from pollination to bloom? I know you're going to talk about that.
Well, it was 5 years. Could be a slight bit longer, but 5 years. And what was the first one there?
How many average seeds per pod?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And this is where it varies per year and so on. If you look on my website, I do actually have a page there that gives you all the statistics year to year, including germination rates and so on.
Okay.
And it would be updated. I didn't get my website wasn't updated last year, but I've just been too busy with certain other things. But for all the years, I have this roughly 40 years worth of data for all the crosses, successful crosses, unsuccessful, and so on. Yeah.
And the last question that she had was, is there an ideal form in reticulatas?
No. Now the smile, when we say that, is you can be looking at the reticulatas, and this is where I'll just quickly take a moment and throw out the idea that I've heard from some growers, one in particular, who will say the fact that a particular iris does not have proper standards is he would dismiss them. So this 11 cc one there on the top right, which has the hairs due to Iris stamfortii, he would dismiss that. He's the one who actually went forward with Eyecatcher, and Eyecatcher does happen to have about a 3/4 height standard. And really, you just want something that looks pleasant, pleasing, and ideally, I would tend to say a wide fall like the 12 DK1. Some of the species are very narrow in their fall. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I'm going to just run on here if I can.
Go ahead.
And I'll just leave this to your eyes to enjoy. The one that I liked in particular when it bloomed was the Cute as a Button. It's a bit on the small side, but it has nice wide big petals, falls, and so it's just kind of showy and just kind of cute. You'll see here in these pictures that I take, they tend to have one flower, and that is of course because when they first bloom there is only one flower in the whole world. Every year I'm focusing, highest priority is what is new, and trying to take some pictures and catalog so that I have the documentation later. Hey, this 13 CP1, what was that really like? I used it in this cross. Well, if I don't have a picture of it, I'm in trouble because I would have no idea. So it becomes important to try and document things as well as you can. Here we're getting to some of the really top things from my perspective of late. The 09 in 2015, that name actually has to do with the fact that the area where the 2015s were planted had 2009 seed in it. I actually had to shift them over to make room. Because they hadn't really been there for that many years, but no problem. I shifted them over, filled in some spaces, and a bulblet got left behind. So I don't know what cross that was from, but that is a very beautiful, in my mind, light yellow. And I'm hoping it somewhat appears to be doing well. We'll see. I am really quite proud of the Perfection, a possible name for that one. It bloomed for the first time in 2019. We do have it over in Holland right now. I would love in one sense to put it in the lab, but this is where, when you look at the cost and then look at the problems with my grower, I don't know what I'll end up doing here. We'll have to see. One of the reasons for wanting to put it in the lab, not only to do with hybridizing, is this particular one is a bit on the small side, and it has to do with the parents. The Iris stamfortii itself and the chat reticulata are on the small side. So there is a bit of a tendency for these to be smaller than your typical commercial reticulatas. And so this might be 40 centimeters tip to tip. So from the tip of one fall to the tip of the other, 40 centimeters, 40 millimeters, so 4 centimeters. And what we find, what we've found so far with the tetraploids is the flowers will be about 15 to 25% larger. So this flower could be in the order of 5 centimeters, so 50 millimeters from tip to tip, which would make it more of a like just in the commercial size. This particular flower is quite interesting just in terms of the way the yellow is. It's not completely covering the whole flower. We've got these cream style arms, and even the sides of the flower are a bit of a cream. So I would love to see that expanded, if you like. And this is where what you're doing, it's this idea of going down the rabbit hole. You're just trying different crosses and seeing what things will give you. It's a gut feel a bit. And what you're trying to do, at least in my mind, is find a path to turn on or off certain switches. If you were to be hybridizing with some of the commercial varieties that are available, like the Iris reticulata hort and maybe Pollen, make a cross with them, well, you're just going to get more purples or blues, or purple-blue combinations, which can be nice, but you're just going to get more of the same. And so even here, and I'll be trying, if we get that far, to indicate even initially how, when I was seeing the first number of years of my results, I was, from my point of view, seeming to get, it's as if I'm going to be just getting more of the same eventually. I'm not going to be getting anything different. And that was then where the chat reticulata had already been brought into certain hybrids and then began to express itself. And we got some interesting things from it. So one could argue these dark markings on the perfection, those are from the chat reticulata, just as one could say the dark brown markings on leopard and the orange coloring are as a result of the chat reticulata, which is just, when you look at the chat reticulata, it's just a purple reticulata. But there's something behind it, along with the genetics of Iris danfordi and sophiensis, that, you know, with their combination, they're able to come up with and express these, the brown markings, the orange. And this is where the question is, well, what can Holcus, if anything, what can Holcus do? Because there are these 4 reticulatas that are 2n equals 18, and they can be intercrossed with each other. And I will mention at a point the idea that you want to get away from your first and second generation. You want to get deeper to try and get things shaken up. And you're trying to get at these recessive things that might be down there. And, you know, I was quite amazed when Tequila Sunrise bloomed. I'd never seen anything like that before. So you know, this idea that it was, of course, one that put in the lab, and I hope that it will do well. But I mean, the reward here, like for any of you who might happen to dabble with hybridizing, the reward is coming up with these things. When I started to work with the Dutch, the goal was to be able to share my hybrids with the rest of the world, so to speak, because of their the growing conditions in Holland are ideal. They have a nice, long, mild spring, which produces large bulbs, and they have a distribution system for selling the bulbs throughout the world. So it seemed ideal to try to work with the Dutch. And the idea of wanting to find a lab and maybe create tetraploids, it was the idea of, well, maybe I can earn a bit of money and use that money to create the tetraploids. I'll just comment that there have been a lot of problems in working with the Dutch. They do try and take advantage of you, and I have heard of that from like Janus Ruxens. Well, I've now experienced it twice, and it's kind of disappointing and kind of a real uphill battle. And it may be that I'll have to walk away from these at a point, but for now, I'm just keep pushing forward. We do have a tetraploid version of leopard, and some bulbs have been delivered of it. I haven't yet seen them in bloom. One of the things, so flower size was one thing I mentioned about tetraploids, plus this idea of being able to make crosses, some crosses that you wouldn't otherwise be able to make. Another slight thing about tetraploids is the colors can be a little bit more intense. So AKA the idea of the orange, if it's a tetraploid, perhaps it's this idea of 4 sets of genes, 4 sets of orange oomph. It gives you a slightly more orange coloring. And potentially we'll see a little bit of that with orange glow in a slide later on. Yeah. One interesting thing, now here in this particular picture, bottom right, to do with orange glow, you'll see that, okay, it's not yellow. Well, it is sort of a yellow. I guess we need another one of the other pictures where we see a true yellow side by side, because I mean, here you do see that it's looking quite yellow, but down this, you can see this one here is much younger. It's got a little bit more orange coloring to it. So the idea was that and especially around the ridge here, so when they first open, there is a glow. So one tends to think of a glow as being increasing. Well, in this case, the glow is initial, and then it fades out a bit. This is quite a nice iris. It does very well. One other thing I'll quickly mention, and we'll see this later on if we get to the slides. The cameras can be fooled. I know I've heard in the past that film cameras can get fooled by the blue coloring, but you'll even see in some of the slides that I have how when we put an RH color chart, the colors, the camera renders the colors a little bit more better, whatever, a little bit more. You'll see the orange is a little bit brighter than what you might otherwise be seeing in the picture. So this 10DR5 at the top left was quite interesting. I had been taking, of course, pictures of the new things, and I had seen this thing bloom, and it's just a yellow with green accents, as I would refer to it. And so for 3 days, it looked like you see it on the top left. And that particular picture is day 3 at 9:20 in the morning. And of course, hey, it's just a yellow with green markings. Yes, I'll want to hybridize it, but there's lots of other things to be looking at and photographing and hybridizing. So it turned out that day 4, around 5:30, I was over in that area of the garden and took the dish pan off of it, as well, covering a bunch of the reticulatas, protecting them from the weather and protecting them from bees interfering with my crosses. And lo and behold, look what I saw. A layer of yellow had disappeared, suddenly disappeared. So I was just quite amazed, because if you look, you can see that this is, just by the markings, it is indeed the same plant. The one standard here is sort of hidden behind the style arm at that point, at this day 3. Sometimes when it's a narrower standard, it doesn't make itself come out from underneath the style arm. Sometimes I'll actually lift the style arm to get them out. Anyway, this brown here, it's interesting how we see the orangish cast to it, but some layer of color has faded out of that, and we see the underlying coloring on the iris. It's interesting to see this, because what we're trying to, if you like, we all need to understand where does the color come from? This idea of anthocyanins and carotenes. It's not that I want to confuse you with more technical details. It's just that it's important to understand what these types of things, so you have an idea of what is possible. In the case of sea green, you can see right in the middle about how it goes to a blue color. But what has happened, it's really close to the end of the bloom when that is happening. So this one reticulata here with a bit of green, that is starting to go. And it's basically, this is the last day. By the next day, this will have shriveled up. They'll have gone its time. So as I'm showing here, the goal is to get you interested to learn more and ideally to try to grow a few. And I had mentioned it prior to starting about how I highly recommend replanting in a new location every roughly 3 years. I do find that the reticulatas, and especially some of the species from the wild, will die out if they're left in the same spot. But hey, no problem. Just after 2 or 3 years, dig the clump up, replant. It's fine to replant in that area, put roughly half of them back, the little bulblets, plant them like the smaller bulbs, put them closer to the soil surface, and then move the other half to another location. And obviously, if you get too many, hey, you've probably got some friends in the plant world that would be interested in having some, and should you eventually lose a particular variety, you can always tap their shoulder and maybe get them back. So I'm just, so to speak, I'm just an electrical engineer, and this is my hobby. And so being an electrical engineer, that means I'm not into botany, but it also means that I'm in the office all day, or had been when I was working for 30 plus years. And it was when I got home from work that I wanted to be outside, but I still wanted to, quote unquote, exercise my brain. And then this is where in 1985, I decided that I wanted to go plant collecting and went there to Turkey for 2 weeks in both 85 and 86, and did quite a bit of a travel around, did a lot of research and so on. And was just then that led me to where we are today, so to speak. One thing the key point of that is just to tell people that hey, I'm just maybe just you are just an average person, right? And this is just too much. You're hearing all of these things. No, you learn a bit by bit, and it's when you are successful with something. So if you're successful with bearded iris, then you try Siberian, you try some Spuria, you try some species. And even with bulbs, crocuses, colchicum, Chinodoxa, Coreodalis, and then sort of see what tickles your fancy. But this is where, in the case of reticulatas, the idea, well, we'll get into the idea they have square leaves and so on, but they're the first reticulata to bloom. So, hey, plant a few and you get to enjoy something to get rid of the winter blahs. What's the first thing in the spring? Nice to see the flowers coming up. So I speak of the rule of threes. So the first time you can hear something, but what was that? I didn't quite get it. And the second time, oh, right, I remember hearing something. Now, okay, well, what was that again? And it's likely by the third time you say, right, now I understand. Of course, the reality is if you're not fully paying attention, it may take a couple more times. But the bottom line with all of these things is just to have fun. And just don't worry about getting overwhelmed by all of this. And in this particular case of this presentation, at the end, you can just ask yourself, what did I find most interesting? What did I learn from it? And of course, given that this is being recorded, you can always look back and re-listen to it, the bits and pieces that might be of interest to you. So here's just a few things to point out to you about reticulata irises. And one of the first things is they are generally referred to as reticulatas, or retics for short. And in Latin, the reticulata means netted. And it can be quite confusing in a sense because there is a species called Iris reticulata. So when you use the word reticulata, do you mean the group as a whole or just the species Iris reticulata? And you'll notice that when I talk about the group as a whole, or write about it, I put a capital on that. Whereas when I talk about the particular species, you would tend to put Iris, and then reticulata will be lowercase in italics. Dr. George Rodienko felt that they were a distinct genus called Iridictium. In the world of iris, they are referred to as, so they're iris, but they're in the subgenus Hermodactyloides, and that was so named in 1846 by Spaak. I would tend to think of, there must have been some mix up back then, because I think there should be another name. They're not really related, I think, from the name, like but one can't argue with, so the botanist really won't hear of your arguments, and so, okay, for now we'll put up with that. And to me, it doesn't matter whether they're Iridictium or iris, they're just a very nice plant, and they are related to iris, so I'm used to talking about them as iris. Dr. Adil Gunnar, a nice fellow that I've met in Turkey and met him again a number of times in England. He is of the opinion that Iris reticulata, the species, is both 2n equals 18 and 2n equals 20. And apparently there are some crocuses with multiple chromosome counts. But the one thing I'm in the process of trying to point out to him, and to get some pictures to fully show him, is that he's not taking into account the bulb differences. And so if you do that, then you get to separate them slightly differently than he does. And it's important just from the hybridizing perspective to recognize this sort of thing. So it's not all clearly laid out in concrete, that we might think. You might initially think, oh yes, so botanists have all of this figured out. No, and we are still learning. This is the neat thing about reticulata irises. A lot of new species which you'll see, have been discovered in the last few years, including one that is stoloniferous. So bloom starts when the snow disappears, lasts for 3 or 4 weeks, and it's weather dependent, of course. So if it's nice and cool, stays nice and cool, the flowers are going to last longer. If it's all of a sudden you get a heat wave, the flowers are going to tend to be last only a small amount of time. Individual flowers last 3 to 7 days, depending on the weather. One would almost wish, is there some way we can coat them with wax or something like that? And I had hopes that perhaps if they were tetraploid, because that also means that the petals are thicker, the stem is thicker, maybe that thickness would mean that they'd stand up to the weather better. But I really wasn't per se seeing that. That just would have been a nice thing if that happened. So some clones are early, some are late. So for additional bloom, you can try planting some where the snow is the last to leave. The flowers, they are small. Sorry about that. For like 1.5 inches to 4 inches in diameter, and only 2.5 to 4 inches tall. But so they're nice to plant around along a border, that sort of thing, or to put maybe a couple in pots. The trouble, of course, is indoors we have heating, and that will tend to dry things out. As we said, reticulatas have a netted coating on them, so there's some examples of them in the coating, just a blow up of it. The leaves are square to octagonal. Typically, they are square. So you see over on the side here, they do actually grow to being 18 to 24 inches in length. But typically they will be below or about equal to the height of the flower when the flower is in bloom. And at the base of each leaf, a new bulb is forming. So be aware that of that sort of thing. Each leaf means there's a bulb down below. The key is to try to provide good growing conditions so the bulbs can regenerate. And in that sense, their goal is to get the flower up, be hybridized in warm weather by bees, produce seed, and regenerate new bulbs all before the hot, dry summer arrives and they go dormant where they are in the wild, up in the mountains. It's not quite a desert, but it does get very dry. The one reticulata that doesn't like to be dried out, into a hard dryness, is Iris vinigodovi, because it's from an alpine meadow, so it likes a bit of moisture during the summer. When I did have it here, I did eventually lose it, but I did plant it in a bed at the front of the house, and it was occasionally getting watering because we had some annuals there, and I would be putting the sprinkler on. Yep, and the hybrids between, in this case, Histrioides and the 2n=20 clones are sterile. You'll see they may seem to have nice pollen, but if you look at them on the pollen under the microscope, you'll find it's misshapen garbage. And I tend here in Toronto to need to protect my bulbs, not from the squirrels eating them the way they would with crocus or tulips, but they are inquisitive. So if I've dug in an area, they may come along and want to plant some peanuts in the shell that some neighbor has given them, or just even they're curious. So by putting a net over top and then maybe covering with some straw or a bit of crushed leaves, that will dissuade them. Even they can dig down through the leaves, they hit the net and they want to go over to a different spot. So they're easily, their attention span isn't that great. So here are some quote unquote commercial typical reticulatas, at least from the 70s and 80s. Iris stanfordii, George, you see Catherine Hodgkin, Natasha, which is really just a light blue. But what you're seeing here is just blues and purples. And that's what you would have seen in the trade, and still largely that's what is in the trade. Now, reticulatas are from Turkey, and they're from Iran, up in Georgia, Azerbaijan. We have pamphylica over here at the left, near, and then Iris stanfordii near Admen. This is where I actually collected the Iris stanfordii in Turkey. There's stanfordii should be about here. Histrioides is up here near the Black Sea. We have down near Jerusalem is Iris vartani, which is very tender. At one point, I understand that there was a white form in the trade, but that might have been in the 1970s, and the particular grower who had it was having problems. In Holland, they get it down to freezing, but he would have had some problems and they gave up on it. This is the catch-22 with having things in Holland. That doesn't mean they're going to last, because if the grower isn't selling enough of them, if the prices aren't good, he can just sell off his stock, and that's that. You don't see them anymore. Histrio is right here, and we have Bacchariana over here. Just a number of reticulatas that I would have collected. Vinogradovi up here in Georgia. The Lake Savan that I mentioned for the white caucasus is right in here. This red circle, that's where Iris Sisianica is from, and that's the stoloniferous reticulata. We have Hyricana from here, Zagrica. The key identifying feature for Zagrica is that after it flowers, the flower heads fall off. There is a reticulata over in the Kolpakowskiana mountains here. There is a Juno iris called Iris Kolpakowskiana. So this reticulata was initially given the name Kolpakowskiana, but when if they're both irises, that gets a bit confusing. So it was renamed. In my opinion, I don't think that name is warranted, valid. So it was, as opposed to here, I refer to it as a variety, because it's just it's a normal iris reticulata. The only thing that separates it from the other reticulatas over here in Turkey, for example, or even in Iran, is the distance. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if somebody years and years ago, took some bulbs and happened to plant them over here. There is a quote unquote weed reticulata in the fields, the saffron fields in Kashmir, India. And it is truly understood to have been transported there, presumably along with the saffron crocuses. And it grows like a weed. And just for what it's worth, there's a picture of it. Yep. So here we are at the species. And it looks fairly easy, fairly straightforward. However, that's where a lot of things have changed over the recent years. And I've tried to make some sense of the reticulatas. So I refer to this group A as all reticulatas having 2n, well, shouldn't say all, because you'll see there are some other 2n = 20. I'm guessing, expecting that these will all interhybridize. I am doing some more work to check that sort of thing out. For the moment, I have made crosses, gotten good seed with Iris Sisianica and white caucasus, so which leads me to guess that it is 2n = 20. How well these forms of Zagrica will cross with Iris reticulata, I'm not quite sure. There's a little bit of questioning. I have done, like last year, did some more crosses. I haven't yet seen all these forms in bloom. I hope to see more of that this year. For sure, this group B, this is where we knew of Danfordii as something unique. It was because of my collected Danfordii that Brian Matthew had its chromosomes counted. Prior to my going to Turkey, there had been chromosome counts of 2n = 27, 28. Obviously, 27 doesn't make any sense. Well, it happens that the commercial form of Danfordii, the one that you'll buy from Holland, is a triploid. So that means so there's 3 sets of chromosomes, and the reality is N is 9. So the diploid form, the one that I collected, or if somebody was to go into Turkey and collect a diploid form, it is 2n = 18. Iris sophiensis, it is known in various books as Iris histrioides variety sophiensis. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing those two have in common is they're just blue. At least the Hort form of sophiensis is blue. But if you actually look at the bulbs, now this is where, as I've written here, histrioides has medium-sized bulblets, whereas the bulblets for sophiensis are rice grain size. Also, the flower, it doesn't quite have the same shape as histrioides have. Histrioides is quite unique. And there can be a number of forms of histrioides, but they all have that sort of similar shape to them. And it's through a plant that I collected in Turkey from south of Erzincan near Chat, this ANMC 2175. Now, how do we distinguish, what is the physical characteristic that makes this a unique species? I don't know specifically. It is a group B reticulata. One could argue, like Holcus is also, we now know through at my request, Tony Hall had Q do a chromosome count, and it came out to be 2n = 18, as I sort of was expecting, and there's some other reasoning for why we expected that. So is Holcus an actual species unto itself, or is it just another form of sophiensis? That we have to find out. But for the moment, I do look at these as 4 unique individuals, so to speak. And the 3 dots are just indicating that there are some other color forms of sophiensis. Yeah, I better get going here. The Adiaman reticulata is interesting. It has rice grain bulblets. I was thinking it might also be 2n = 18, but it turned out when Tony Hall did the chromosome count on Holcus, he also, Q did have some bulbs of this, and they did Tony did do a chromosome count, and it turned out to be 16. I have this past year made a lot of crosses with histrioides and Adiamanica, and it begs the question, I wonder what the hybrids are going to look like, just as we have Catherine Hodgkin being the hybrid of Vinigodovi and histrioides. But I better get going because we're really running behind here. So trying to put what you just saw in perspective, and really not sort of truly talking as much about everything there, this gives you an overview, and you can see what Vinigodovi looks like. This light eggshell yellow. So Vinigodovi and Danfordii, the only 2 yellows. You can see what the Adiamanica reticulata looks like. It's quite an interesting and unusual one. Unfortunately, it doesn't from my point of view, from what I see, it doesn't have a tendency to make bloom size bulbs. If anything, one might say it's worse than Danfortii, but this is where maybe a cross with Histioides, even if the resulting plants are sterile, maybe that could produce an interesting hybrid with some of this purplish color on the fall and so on. But we'll see what ends up with that. This is just a typical reticulata, just Iris reticulata itself. Baccheriana, its claim to fame is it has an octagonal leaf, but as Brian Matthew pointed out in his book, The Iris, a number of years ago, he had been plant collecting in Iran, and there are forms of Iranian reticulatas with 6 ribbed leaves, so hexagonal, and there may be octagonal ones there as well. So in my mind, yes, I do recognize that it has an 8-sided leaf, which is quite unusual, but I sort of group it as one of the variations of Iris reticulata. And we have Iris hyricana there, which had historically been given its own species name, but I really believe it is Iris reticulata variety hyricana. Iris Sisianica, I mentioned to you, it's just a purple, but that's the stoloniferous reticulata. To you and I, we look at that and we say, well, it's just a purple reticulata. Now, if you could come up with some interesting colors, that would be nice. Zagrica, oh, okay, that's kind of beautiful. This is one of the ones where the flower falls off. We have Kolpakowskiana. These down here are related to the Juno irises, and they're off in Kyrgyzstan Republic, so a little bit further east from the other reticulatas. Let's go on from here. So I'm going to quickly go at Group A, looking at Iris reticulata. So a couple of forms of Baccheriana here with not only the octagonal leaf, but it has this ink blue fall, very, very dark blue. The plants on the right-hand side and at the bottom, those are potentially forms of Baccheriana over in Iran, from Iran. So they have a dark marking on the fall. I can't, these are not mine. They're people in England, Alpine Garden Societies. And you'd have to get a hold of these. This is the difficult thing, getting a hold of all these things to properly study them. But anyway, so when we're studying reticulatas, we're looking at various characteristics, just to try and understand if you happen to get a plant from somebody, how do you place it? Where does it belong? You're looking at characteristics to do with the bulbs, there's the seed pods. Then you're looking at characteristics of the bulbs. The 3 slides, the pictures on the left are to do with the 2n = 18. You see the rice grain bulblets. Here's a clump. This is a version of Sophiensis from the Hop Pass in Turkey. It was a single large flowering bulb. And at the end of the first year of flowering and when it gets dug up, you see that there is now a large bulb, a medium-sized bulb. Certainly the large bulb will bloom. It just depends on the size of the medium-sized bulb as to whether it will bloom. And it produced all these bulblets. And that's where it's almost a mechanism for survival. If something happens to the big bulb, they've got all these little ones, but they're a distance down in the ground. They need to, if the main bulb does die out, then they can sort of find their way up more easily through that. To you and I, that's what you really want to plant closer to the soil surface, almost like a first year or second year seedling. And then it can be able to produce more. This is one way of, if you had something very special, very rare, then take those bulblets, put them close to the soil surface, and you could conceivably get one blooming flower after about 3 years. You should be able to, these could conceivably be all blooming for you. Here is Leopard, the 12I01. This is after having bloomed for the very first time. I guess for some reason 1 year it didn't bloom, but then when it did bloom, I actually got 3 blooms, and those 3 blooms, the 3 main bloom size bulbs have now turned into, at this point, 6 large bulbs, and we have a bunch of small bulblets. These had come off the bottom of the clump. That's why I'm showing them there, but you can see a couple over here. The bulbs on the right are from Iris reticulata, and it does not have these little rice grain bulblets. It can, on occasion, have small bulbs like this little one down here. And where Dr. Adil Gunnar is coming from, I certainly understand. If the iris has been in the wild for a while and is able to produce a clump of flowers, you're going to get some of these smaller bulbs in there, in the clump, and like a multiple bulb clump. But it's not the same as having the 2n equals 18. You're going to tend to more get some of these longer elongated or medium-sized bulbs. Here's some collected forms of Iris reticulata. You will see how they are tend to be quite narrow. So I don't necessarily think that's very showy, but this is where, when you talk about showy, it's a matter of if they form a clump. AKA if, hey, my hybrids are small. But if they're in a clump, does it really matter? You've got quite a few there to enjoy. Here's some more just Iris reticulata. The one thing I was, when I went to Turkey, what was I trying to look for? I wanted to get some genetic material to create some more diversity, some more variation. So to me, one of the interesting things of this particular reticulata is this coloring on the fall, how it's got multiple colors, how the color on the ridge, in this case, is spilling over onto the fall. And begs the question, what can you do with that? But it's if all the rest of the flower is just going to stay purple and blue, well, it just does truly come down to more purples and blues. Nice, but nothing outstanding. Here is the nice forms of Zagrica. The particular plant on the left is something that I was kindly given by Arnie Simeon some 20 odd years ago. I did not recognize how special or unique it was. Well, I mean, I treated it as special, but this is where you have to, like, top priority. If I'd realized how special it was, I would have made an effort, an extra special effort, to ensure that the bulbs were replanted and moved to a second spot and so on. I didn't recognize the need for that at this point. And hopefully I now have this again. It's just because it's an amina, just the white standards and style arms, and then the colored fall, and you go, what could we do with this? It is still a case of genetics as to whether this would cross successfully with other plants. And I indeed was doing some hybridizing with this guy, but I didn't really get much from it. So it may be an issue to do with the genetics. Some other forms of Zagrica. So these, ideally, all of these. Oh, one other thing about that, the flower on this flower here, as far as I remember, and Arnie has confirmed this from his point of view, the flower did not fall off. So it may not be correct to call it Iris Zagrica, but for now, Janus Ructions and so on, great, Janus, great guy, has classified it as part of Zagrica. And so, assuming it does bloom here, or the plants that I got from him, it will see whether they do, the flowers fall off. Here's the bottom right, Luke. He has a very nice form from the wild, a picture. So you get to see, holy cow, if only we could do something with these. Zagrica is quite unusual compared to just your typical purple or blue reticulata. Iris Sisianica, it had only been discovered just around 2013, written up in 2016, something like that. It is just a purple, right? The idea that it is a stoloniferous reticulata, I go, holy cow, we've never seen or had heard of anything like this. Didn't even think it was possible in reticulata irises. Here are some bulbs. I bought some bulbs of it from Leonid Bondarenko, who was one of the discoverers of it. And I had them given to the Dutch bulb grower. I did have one put into the lab to be converted to tetraploid, aka to use in hybridizing at the tetraploid level. I hope it is the wide flowered form, because that is more beautiful than this narrowish form. There seem to be, out of the bulbs I have, just these two forms of it. You can see the stolon starting in the fall. In around April 24th, I went and I dug up dug around the area. This is actually the picture of the flowers in bloom is April 25th. So the day before I took that particular picture, because I was taking lots of pictures of it around that time, I was curious, and I had already pointed the stolon in one particular direction, so I knew which way to be careful to dig down at. And I found this runner down there. And you can see in the close-up that the point is 2 centimeters from a bulge here. So my guess was that indeed we're going to find a new bulb forming here. And indeed, some 3 weeks later, I checked back. Don't want to disturb it too much because you might just destroy it, tear something. You got to try. That's why I didn't quite take all the soil away from the base of the bulb to see it where the joint actually was. So the 3 weeks later, on May 14th, I dug the bulb up, dug up in that area, and I saw this small bulb forming. Now, the point at that time is it's not as rigid. This could no longer be tunneling in through the ground. And I went and got a ruler, lifted up the bulb, and you can see I ended up moving the point, just a little piece of tissue, so to speak. There is still a bit of a point, but I was curious. I wanted to get a measurement of the width of that. Another 3.5 weeks later, this is a picture of a different stolon, and it is, you can see now by this particular measurement that new bulb was forming 5 inches from the original mother bulb, which is down in here. And I did, this is a third bulb, because this particular bulb is actually when I took the ruler and measured, it's 1 centimeter in diameter, so it's large enough to bloom. But here's another cleaned up bulb that was 8 millimeters in diameter. The original bulb number 1 has a little dimple in it. It didn't really get that much bigger. So, I mean, just you're trying to make different observations, learn different things. Was successful in crossing this with white caucasus. Now, if we take a look at the Iris reticulata as I was working with them in the earlier years, you'll see that I had been making a lot of crosses, and largely they were just blues and purples. So this is something just to impress upon you about how, if you work with the commercial stock, hey, that's a starting point. You're just going to get these blues and purples. If you're interested, obviously get something like eye catcher and make a cross, self the eye catcher, make it with some of my other hybrids, and you'll jump in to where I'm working at a lot quicker. There are some Hystrides by Vinogradovi hybrids where it looks kind of white up there. I did, on the second time I was going over to Turkey, I was then married at that point, and my wife is in the dark blue sweater here. And we are standing in a field with William Van Eden, who hybridized introduced a number of reticulatas in the 1970s. So Edward, George is particularly noteworthy, Gordon, Ida, Michael, lesser known, Natasha is one of his. This is his field of reticulatas. At the time we were going over, this would have already been in bloom or finished blooming. Whoops, wrong way. And there are some new, so to speak, new sports in the market. Painted Lady is a sport of Pauline, and Frozen Planet is a hybrid from Claret. The smile here is just that time's getting on, and I end up talking a little bit longer, and we've only just partly way through here. I'll quickly say this is Iris pamphylica. This is where I found it in the wild. It is a bit more difficult to grow. It doesn't really hybridize with other reticulatas, even though it is a reticulata, and even though the chromosome count is 2n = 20. Iris vartani is from Jerusalem. It is very tender from our point of view. It might be good for some of the southern states. The catch-22 is I don't know where you would get it. You need to perhaps find somebody from Israel who can get you some bulbs. It's just unfortunate that it's not being grown. There's no place to get it. Obviously, what you see here are collectors. If you get to know some alpine growers and what they have in their collections, maybe you can find somebody who has it. Iris histrio, very lovely, very nice, tend to be spotted. It's a little bit of a unique thing. It's too bad that we don't see any of this or much of this, pretty well, almost none of it available commercially. And the particular form that used to be available, this one is Iris histrio subspecies abinensis. The others just subspecies histrio. And then we get into the Kolpakowskiana from up in this area where the X is, and Winkleri down in this area, very high up in the mountains. So here's some pictures of Kolpakowskiana, very lovely, interesting coloring, somewhat difficult to grow, to keep. So I have even raised it from seed, but it's just not staying around. One of the things about Kolpakowskiana is it has spherical pollen, and its leaf is narrow like the reticulatas, but and slightly cupped. But you can see it is from a pollen point of view, it's closely allied with Juno irises, which the pollen look like soccer balls. The pollen of reticulatas look like barley, grains of barley with a bit of a pebbled surface. I only put the pebbling on one of them. To the naked eye, if you look at some of the hybrids with histioides and Iris reticulata, you'll find that although it's nice, fluffy, what appears to be nice, fluffy pollen, under my microscope, you'll see it's misshapen garbage. And if you try to make crosses with it, you're just wasting your time. Okay, now we're getting into the 2n = 16. So this is where we're getting in particular to the Catherine Hodgkin crosses. So histioides, Vinigodovi, the Adiumen reticulata. There's a chance this purple reticulata is 2n = 16. About 3 years ago, I happened to make a cross with it and histioides, and I did successfully get some good seed. I can't say whether any of it germinated. My highest priority last year was crossing the Adiumen reticulata with histioides, and I was successful at doing that and got quite a few seeds. So hopefully we'll make the other cross this year. This is, in the past, there have been a number of forms of histioides available. Rennie Immaculae was one. Major was very popular, but Lady Beatrix Stanley has come along and it's displaced any of the other varieties. This is where things will come into the market, but they will disappear. But this is a very lovely variety, very large, nice large flowers. For what it's worth, I showed you that picture back from 1992, 93. Here are some of my hybrids. Interestingly, you can put Vinigodovi pollen onto histioides, but it does not work in the other direction. You will end up with, there won't be any seeds. But you can get, these are all F1, but they're sterile dead ends. You can't go any further. This could, you could say, look like Catherine Gold a bit. Well, this is one that I hybridized rather than as being a sport. But this is why, if we could take that up to the tetraploid level, these guys up to the tetraploid level, then you should be able to continue working with them. In the trade, of course, there was Catherine Hodgkin. E.B. Anderson hybridized that around 1955, and it bloomed for the first time in 1960. At the time, he didn't know what exactly had happened, but they did eventually work out because he had Danfortii. Well, don't know whether it was a diploid form, but he did have Danfortii in his garden, and he did have Vinigodovi in his garden. And of course, they did come to realize it was Vinigodovi that was the pollinator. Some copycat, so to speak, not saying that in a negative light, crosses Sheila Ann Germani and Frank Elder, because hey, I'm copying. I created some hybrids like this. I'm not knocking that. Whoops. Catherine Gold, that's just a sport of Catherine Hodgkin. So and there are two growers that found it separately, and they are working together to market it. That one of the growers also found a sport of Sheila Ann Germani, which they named Polar Ice. A completely different grower got a sport of Frank Elder, which refers to as Phenola. So less markings on it, or lighter markings on it. And you can see there's one straggler in there. The one problem with these reticulatas is they are susceptible to virus. These are some extreme pictures. In one sense, one could say like virus tulips. These look very nice. Interestingly, the one Catherine Hodgkin here appears free of virus, and it's almost looks like they came from the same bulb. You see those extreme examples where here's some more typical examples. Catherine Hodgkin with the blue markings in them. These actually happen to be bulbs that were shipped from Holland to the Jacquemond in England, and he or Nesta and John Aman were forcing them for a show at the Royal Horticultural Society. But it's just interesting. There is, in one sense, there isn't any clean stock. You can get a lot of bulbs that are clean, but obviously they are being sold with some virus in them. Here's just that Adiman reticulata from Adil Gunner's point of view. He's named it as a subspecies after his daughter. That was nice of him. But the reality is, in looking at the bulbs and it is not Iris reticulata. It is a species unto itself. And since it was collected near Adiaman, the city, I have started referring to it as Adiamanica. And just to show you, look, I've got lots of seed from it, and they all look like good seeds. That doesn't mean they're going to germinate. I did make a lot, or get a lot of crosses between the reticulata, Iris reticulata from Lake Sevan, and Iris Danfortii. So 2n equals 20 times 2n equals 18. And the seeds look like this. I could have had, I don't know, I'll just suggest overall in terms of all the different crosses, several hundred over many, many years. I kept trying. None of them germinated. So let's just do a quick overview of the hybrids from these species. Catherine Hodgkin, Sheila Ann Germani, Frank Elder, and we have the sports, Phenola, Catherine Gold, Polar Ice. Those all have to do with the Vinigodovi histioides. They're all dead ends, sterile dead ends. These are hybrids with histioides. Histioides will cross with both ways with any of the Iris reticulata varieties like Baccaria, Hyricana, and that's where we got Harmony, Joyce, Violet, Beauty, George, etc. And sports of Harmony are Alida, Pixie, and Rejoice. One of them is, I believe Alida might be the light blue, Pixie's a violet as opposed to a blue, and Rejoice happens to be a new purple, which has just hit the market. In terms of hybrids within the Reticulata group, J.S. Dite, Pauline, so these are older varieties, Claret, Gordon, Frozen, now the new one, Frozen Planet. And then there are some sports. Blue Note is a sport of Pauline. It's a blue sport of the purple Pauline. And then there is Painted Lady, which is a white with blue markings. There is also a Vinigodovi alba that has from time to time been in the market. It is not a form of Vinigodovi. It is a Cantab by Vinigodovi cross. And I've done that myself, or had years ago made, even before I saw this Vinigodovi alba. For what it's worth, you know, I do have some crosses. My white crosses, my spot on, the sensational. And of course, in the 2N=18, I have a number of things which I'm trying to, that are in the market now, are available for sale. Whether they get into Eyecatcher, I know is available in the United States. And perhaps if enough people were to ask, you know, Brent and Becky would carry some of those other ones. I know all of the people, they can get a hold of some of those varieties. There have been, Ron van Leerop in Holland has made some crosses with Cantab and Vinigodovi, and those are his that he showed at the Lentetun. Otto Fauser down in Australia created Polly, which was a cross between AIS Reticulata Hort and Vinigodovi. I did get a couple of bulbs years ago from him. I never, unfortunately, got it to bloom. This is a picture he had sent me of it. And this is the Vinigodovi alba that's in the trade. And this is on the right, bottom right, is my Cantab by Vinigodovi. And there have been, this is where Hybricana can be used with Dan40i to come up with, now this is where the commercial Hybricana, I don't know that it's available anymore. It used to be available consistently for a number of years. And Janis Ructions had a version that was collected, and he referred to it it's from the Thalish Mountains, or Thales Mountains. Anyway, here's my crosses with Dan40i. So kind of interesting, but they are sterile dead ends. You can't go anywhere with that. Now, the catch-22 is we're at the point where we're wanting to go down the rabbit hole. And I'm seeing the time, and I don't know. I'm willing to go on.
Well,
but
I think, Alan, if this is a good place to stop, we should do that. We do have a few questions, and we want to get to those. And then we will continue this and have an update on everything next fall or
Yeah.
early
I'm going to
next
flop at
year.
the end here. I'll just quickly flip to some pictures to give you, to whet your appetite, but we'll hold it here. I did get a little bit further 2 days ago, but then, you know, I've been encouraged to talk a little bit more and, you know, answer some questions and so on. Go ahead with your questions.
You ready for the questions now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think you've answered a couple of these, but one is, are you using colchicine on the embryo, on seeds, or tissue culture?
So the lab is using colchicine on the tissue culture.
Okay.
So they would take a bulb and they put it in sterile conditions, grow it on a medium, and then they would be treating. They would raise pieces off of the initial one, and then they would be treating different dilutions, solutions.
Okay. And then there's a question.
Quickly add is it just one would think, oh gee, can't we just get tetraploids? Like, isn't it okay, trial and error? But I would be tending to suggest, and this might be for Chuck Chapman, that there are a lot of now I'm going to get the word wrong, chimeras, so partially converted.
Yeah,
and
chimeras.
so the catch-22 is being able to use those in crosses, but it does look like I may have, for the first time last year, gotten some seeds.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah.
Then there's a question which I think you've already answered. How long does a bloom stay open? I think you said 3 to 7 days, depending on the weather.
The temperature, that's right.
Okay. And there's a question, how much cold is necessary for good bloom? I live in zone 7B, this person says.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily know, even to do with the USDA zones, but specifically I could say If it gets down towards freezing, and I might go as far as roughly speaking, so you occasionally get some freezing, then you should be able to, I would expect, be able to grow them. So the thing to keep in mind is, of course, they are being grown in Holland. They don't get much snow in Holland, very, very little. They can get cold there. They do on occasion, but not regularly, they do go skating on the canals, or the canals are frozen enough. But typically I don't find, when I've gone over for 13 years, I don't find the canals are frozen. These also grow around London, England, and so Wisley, some of the RHS gardens, and I just don't know exactly how cold it gets, but when I'm going over in February, hey, to me, it's like spring. So they get cold, but not really, really cold.
Okay. And then a question from Martha Rhodes. She says, I moved recently. If you plant bulbs now, will they bloom this year?
Well, it's too late to plant bulbs. You wouldn't even be able to get them from anywhere. Now, if she's meaning that she's wanting to move them, you can dig them up with a clump of soil around them, you know, pop them in a box or something like that. Try not to let the roots get exposed. Interesting point I'll just mention. You think about a person who's going plant collecting in Turkey. Ideally, you know, when I went, I would like to be able to see something that I'm about to collect. And there would be times when you're going around different elevations and so on that you do run into bulbs that are in bloom. And like crocuses, essentially, you've put all of your energy into getting the flower up, getting the leaf up. So you've somewhat exhausted the bulb. And it is in the growing season, having the leaf up, that it would be regenerating the bulb. So even if it's just a plant that's not big enough to bloom, it has now expelled some of its energy to get the leaf up. I believe what it's actually doing in that case is just putting energy back into the bulb, but the bulb has been somewhat depleted. So the case in point, when I was going around collecting in Turkey, I actually had some plastic bags. They had some holes in them, but I would put some dirt and I would put the plant in the dirt, and I would tend to let that dry out. So I would be trying to let it grow as long as possible. And so what would end up happening is you'd end up with, at the end, when I went to come home and had to have all the bulbs cleaned. So the bulbs are cleaned of any soil and nicely, so when they get inspected to get a phytosanitary certificate, they are much reduced in size. And all that means is, okay, it's just going to take a year, probably 2 years, to get back up to bloom size, and then maybe by the third year it will bloom. You're still a bit ahead of the game as opposed to collecting seeds. And the trouble with seeds, you know, finding them in the wild is just being able to find them, knowing what the plant was. And you're going to have, say in Turkey, you're going to have some sheep come along, the grazing, goats, and they'll eat some of those. So get the plants while you can, and just try to keep them. So if you're moving your house, as you might do with bearded iris, Siberian iris, maybe they're in bloom at that time. Will you still dig up a piece, take it to your new location? You're going to heal it in. It's obviously going to be affected severely by being transplanted at the wrong time, but no problem. It will just take a couple of years to recover.
Okay.
But you now have saved what your plant. Yeah, I mean, a bit of work, but I mean, hey, we got a way of doing this. Yeah.
Yes. We've got one more question in the chat, and then there's 2 or 3 questions that were emailed to us that I want to get to. What is your habitat like at home? Grassland or boreal forest? And there's a follow-up on Iris winogradowii. Is that easier to grow?
Well, it all depends on where you are. You need to have a damp location for it, and then you'll be able to grow it. Where it's so the reticulatas, they don't mind the water moisture in the summer or even in the spring. Excuse me, they don't mind the moisture, like a lot of snow melt in the spring, because they're used to that in the mountains. They just don't like to be sitting in moisture more as the season gets on. The smart thing, if you do actually have problems with growing reticulatas, is to dig them up when the leaves die down and store them in your garage. And then you would be able to replant them in the fall. So it's a matter of having, fairly well drained soil, and just with Vinicodovi, it needs to be somewhere. This is where I'm not sure. I wouldn't necessarily be digging that up and storing it in the garage, but I would want to put it, like I say, if you have some annuals, if you have some place where it does get watering when some amount of water when it's dry, hot and dry.
Okay. And then going to the questions that were emailed to us ahead of time, there's about 3 of those. One quick one maybe is, are there rebloomers?
No.
Okay.
Just very clearly, the reticulatas want to be able to get a bulb up, a flower up, and where they're from, it's going to get very hot and dry. The closest thing you get is if the bulb is large enough, it actually can produce a second flower, and the second flower will come say a week later or something like that. It will be slightly smaller in size, so it's not really reblooming, but you get another bloom is what we're getting.
Ending the bloom a little bit. Then since the bloom doesn't last more than a few days and unpredictable, should these be viewed in a show or garden?
Well, it all depends on what you want to do. I'll suggest that people in England who have like glass houses, a small greenhouse, and milder temperatures, they like to show alpines, be it crocuses, gallianthus, or Iris reticulata. So you could have a pot of, you could be having them in pots. The one thing we do have to be careful of, where you have a good winter, is you don't want the pot, the bulbs, to go through freezing and cooling cycles, especially very severe ones. Your bulbs will turn to mush. So what they get confused at, like if they're planted in the ground, they'll be fine. But if they're in a pot and the pot is sitting up on a table or something like that, if it goes fairly suddenly from being very cold to being very warm and then back to being very cold, just as apple trees, the buds on apple trees will be damaged, perhaps even more so your bulbs, be they crocus, reticulatas, tulips, if they're in a pot, you'll be killing them. Whereas you could conceivably pot up some reticulatas, have them sitting in a spot that you can get access to, and you could bring them indoors. Now, you just don't want them to dry out. So what I'm getting at, for the Lentiton, for the show, the spring show in Holland, both for tulips and various other bulbs, daffodils and reticulata irises, the Dutch growers that are going to these shows, they have cooling areas, and they would actually have controlled conditions whereby they can actually warm the reticulatas up, but not let them dry out from we have an oil furnace here still, or if it was a gas furnace, that has quite drying conditions. But if you could keep a humidity, aka not, the flowers would stay fresh. You can handle them that way. With the number of bulbs I'm dealing with personally for my own use, I just plant them in the ground, as you can see in this picture here. You can see how I use dish pans and upside down tin cans. A lot of the dish pans have been taken off in these cases. I wouldn't be taking this many dish pans off if the bees were around, because they would invariably be interfering with my crosses. But the dish pans are there to keep the snow and the bees away. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting too. Then the last question I have that was emailed to us refers to AIS sanctioned shows, I think. It says, what section or class could a reticulata be submitted in at an IRIS show? And I don't know if you have those shows in your area or are familiar with those.
Well, yeah, the smile is we have or had the Canadian Iris Society. We have the Ontario Iris Society now, so a local group. But the shows that we tend to have here are more for the tall bearded irises, and therefore you get some standard dwarfs, you get some Siberians. There isn't any show on at this time of the year, like in April when they would be blooming here. It would be a little bit different. So there is a Toronto Bulb Society, and there is also here in Toronto the Ontario Rock Garden Group. I'm just too busy with my own things that I don't tend to have time for those. It's good. They help me in my earlier years. You could easily take a pot of blooms into one of these. I know the Toronto Bulb Society was promoting people to bring in material in pots, and they would try to give some, judging for them and so on. But it wasn't the Alpine Garden Society in England, various alpine separate groups around the country. Without question, and the Scottish Rock Garden, they have a get together that would have been held in February, and a lot of people would be submitting various potted pots of reticulatas and other plants for these shows.
Okay.
Just in our areas, we don't do quite that.
Yeah, and I would just add that some shows do have a bulbous iris class. Here in Lincoln, Nebraska, we've had, in the past, we've had very early shows, and we actually had a class for bulbous irises. Or you could enter them, if that isn't in there, you could, most shows have a miscellaneous class. So if you're looking for some place, you could put them there. And I would also mention that if your show schedule permits it, a potted iris class is now allowed at AIS sanctioned shows. So you can take potted irises to AIS shows if that's permitted in your show schedule.
This is where at one point, John Amand from the firm Jacquemond had spoken about the idea of possibly having a refrigerator where he'd need to have somebody adjust the temperature, and with the possibility of trying to hold some reticulatas for Chelsea, but he never actually did that. But it was something, a possibility. But that's where you end up putting a lot of extra work in and effort to try and hold reticulatas for a particular show. Catch-22 being that if it's nice and warm, the individual blooms aren't going to be the freshest by the end of the show, where if a show runs for several days.
Right. I think that's all the questions we have, unless somebody else has any. Did have a comment. Someone says, I want a whole day session with breakout groups, just talk about these reticulatas. This has been incredible.
Yep. Well, this is where doing a little bit of flipping now. I presume that's showing up on people's screen, and you get to see this is Orange Delight. And it was kind of amazing. Who would have thought you cross these two irises, this 97 BG1 with 03 AJ2, and get that? I never, this is what makes this so fascinating. And it is only 3 generations from the species, which are down here at the bottom level. And then you see the F1s, and then these are the F2s that were crossed, and holy cow. I mean, it's nice to get that. Now that does represent, I guess, 15 years of time. But if for you, the listeners of this program, if you can jump in, and not that you can specifically buy these particular varieties, but by buying something like Eyecatcher and maybe Sea Breeze or North Star, you can effectively jump in at this upper level and get various things. On my website, for what it's worth, again, not updated from last year, just too busy with things, I do show parentage. So you can see for a given variety, you can see its parents and its grandparents, and that just becomes interesting. I'm sharing information that some people might want to tend in the past to keep confidential. And it is true that this is where the Dutch could, so to speak, surpass me by taking my information that I'm presenting here and repeating this work. I know of a couple of people that have done something along these lines, not quite the same. But my protection against that, so to speak, is the fact that I'm spending the money to get these tetraploids, and I'm going to, in one sense, I'll say I hope, go to a whole different level by being able to work with tetraploids. But and that gives, you know, hey, I'm now 68, so maybe one might hope I've got at least another 15 years in me to do these, even if it's just for my own enjoyment.